Hello and welcome to Socialism, the weekly Marxist analysis podcast from the Socialist Party. Tens of thousands of young people walked out of schools, colleges and universities across the country on Friday to protest against climate change. So today we're discussing what the protests were like, what the Socialist Party was saying on them, and what they could show about the potential to build a mass movement not only on climate change, but against all the burning problems young people and workers face, and for a socialist alternative. Make sure you keep listening right to the end this week to hear a speech given by a Socialist Party member on the Leeds protest.
I'm here today with Theo Sharieff and Helen Pattison. Theo is the national organiser of Socialist Students and Helen is the youth and student organiser for the Socialist Party in London. Hello both.
Hello.
And we're going to be discussing the very exciting development that took place on Friday in the school strike for climate, which both of you attended the London protest of. So to start with, maybe Theo, if you want to give us just a bit of a flavour of what did happen on Friday.
Well, like you said, thousands of school and college students on Friday, the 15th of February, walked out of their lessons in the morning, not only in London but all across the country. In many towns and cities there were thousands of students out and they were protesting against climate change. In London there were tens of thousands outside Downing Street, in Parliament Square, really just trying to raise awareness of the issue, fighting against climate change, environmental destruction, but also a lot of chants against Theresa May, anger at the Tories in general, demanding that Theresa May and the Tory party go as well. And Socialist Students participated. We intervened in the protests. We had an open mic at the event in London where we welcomed school and college students to put their point of view about what is needed to fight against climate change. How do we carry on building the movement? How do we escalate the struggle? Yeah, and it was very good. It was very interesting.
Because you were saying earlier today that it was like a really vibrant and young protest, and like that was a kind of feature in it, isn't it, of how young some of the people participating were? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it was like nothing that I think, well, personally me, because I'm a little bit younger, but there's like nothing really I'd ever seen before in terms of just the amount of school and college students just all in one place and climbing on top of bus stops and marching up and down Whitehall and things like that. It was incredibly energetic and determined and fighting, so yeah, it was really fantastic.
And definitely they had to march off, because the idea of just standing still and not taking this message to Theresa May, marching up to Downing Street, they didn't want to stay still. They wanted to march off and really make sure she heard us chanting.
And we should point out as well, I suppose, that this is part of an international phenomenon that's been happening, that is taking place in a number of countries already, and we'll probably come on to, but there's an international day of action in a month's time that will be taking part in building up to as well. So, Helen, what was the Socialist Party saying on these protests then?
So we were really trying to engage in the debate because there were lots of people who were obviously extremely worried about the state of the planet and wanted to discuss and talk about it, which I think as well is why our open mic was so successful. People had ideas about what we needed to do and we wanted to discuss it with them. We were calling for socialist change to stop climate change, raising things like the fact that 100 companies are responsible for 71% of greenhouse gas emissions. They're clearly not willing to put people and the planet before their drive for profit and fighting for their own interests, and therefore we need to answer that with a real alternative to this rotten system and climate change. And those kinds of ideas went down really well. There was very little faith in May, her government, the establishment, that they're going to take on this issue as something that they care about, because they clearly haven't shown that they do care about it over the last few years. And then I think particularly young people saw this report about 12 years until there's irreparable damage and thought, right, a movement, what can we do? Going out and protesting, they were definitely inspired to do that.
And Theo, that's obviously kind of mainly on climate change, but was it only climate change that had motivated people to come out on that protest?
Yeah, I mean, as you'd expect, generally, in the speeches and the contributions that school and college students gave on our open mic, it was mainly people talking about climate change, but it wasn't just that. I mean, like I said before, this feeling of general anger, chants against Theresa May and the Tories was a very big feature, but also students were talking about things like cuts to education. They were raising points about education about climate change and things like that is never on the school curriculum, things like that. But I definitely agree with Helen, this general feeling that the system isn't working and that the system capitalism isn't able to provide the massive turnaround which is needed in such a short period of time in order to save the environment, fight for the future protection of the planet. But also we were discussing generally things, like I said before, like how do we actually build a bigger movement? So on the Socialist Students open mic, we were raising all the points that Helen made about we think it's capitalism that is the reason that climate change is happening. We need to fight for a socialist alternative to that in order to fight against climate change. But there was also a lot of discussion about how you actually build the movement. So, for example, Extinction Rebellion has talked a lot about blocking roads, sort of like shutting down central London with direct actions. And a lot of speakers were talking about that and highlighting that as a positive thing. And then we sort of raised in response to that, that's good, that's a start, but why stop there? Why settle for just shutting down a few roads in central London, but why not shut down the whole country? And then we link that to, the role that the trade unions could be playing in this, the role that the working class, through strike actions, linking up with this new youth movement, the massive boost, the massive escalation they could provide to this. And the open mic was really interesting, actually, because it was, I think for some young people, it was the first time they'd heard these ideas, and they were really engaging in the discussion and the debate because they were, like Helen said, determined to find a way to escalate things. I think it speaks to the determination of these young people, of these students, that at the moment no mass big organisations like the trade unions or the NUS, for example, is giving a lead on these issues. So they're just desperate to do something, and that's why they're going along. They've walked out of their schools and colleges. They're blocking roads, direct actions, things like that. But there is a real thirst for discussing how we take it further, an awareness that it isn't enough to do 1 or 2 protests and block the streets for a couple of hours on an afternoon, but that it needs to go beyond that something bigger than that has to be built. And I think that was definitely, you could tell that from the discussions that we were having on the open mic.
And so you've both talked about people as being angry and enthusiastic and, keen to fight for change. And I think it's interesting that, this isn't the only thing that young people have been active on recently, isn't it? Like there were big protests against Trump last year on his visit. Internationally, there have been big protests against Trump. Theo, you've been on the podcast before about the Gilets Jaunes movement in France. So what do you think that these things, and this is kind of maybe the most explicit example in Britain recently, but what does it show about young people's mood at the moment, Helen?
I definitely think that there was just the idea that they took up the slogan "system change, not climate change," which we've been trying to add to a little bit by saying socialist change, not climate change. We don't just want any system, we want a socialist society. But I think that really shows that there's just no faith in the ruling elite to offer these people, young people, a decent future, a decent life on this planet. 12 years, these people, they'll still be in their 20s and 30s, and essentially watching, the environment really be destroyed around them. So I definitely feel that there was just no faith in the Tories or Theresa May, that these people have a position of power around the environment, but around everything. And what have they offered people? They've offered austerity. They've offered no chance to go to university, 0 hours contracts. You could definitely tell that people were feeling the impacts of all of these attacks on people's living standards over the last few years, and angry about all of them, and saw no faith in this system. That's why they took up the chant.
And I think just a bit more, like, to get a picture of what, like, an idea of what it was like in London in terms of, like, the mood and the discussions. On the one hand, you had, like, ourselves, Socialist Students, Socialist Party, putting a very political, message and putting our programme forward on how to fight, socialist change like climate change. And that was echoed, there were school and college students standing up, and by the end of the afternoon, they were saying things like, it's capitalism that's the issue, we need to fight for socialism. But then on the other hand, you had some people saying, no, we can't make it political because it's almost an issue above politics, and we need to not make it political. But the impression I got was anyone who said that, it was because they were talking about building as wide, as broad, a bigger movement as possible to confront the issue head on. And actually a lot of people who stood up and said that and said, oh, it's not political, would then go on to say, that, oh, it's 100 corporations since the late 80s who have contributed the most towards climate change. So even in the minds of people who might not immediately have thought that, a socialist solution is necessary to ending climate change, you could definitely see they were starting to sort of grasp, they were starting to come towards that a little bit in the course of the discussion and sort of the debate that was generated with the open mic that we put on.
So let's talk about tactics a bit, because it is, as I said earlier, it's part of an international phenomena of student strikes in particular, and young people walking out of school and colleges and so on in protest about climate change in this particular instance. But student walkouts is actually something that the Socialist Party and Socialist Students has called for over a number of issues and quite a long time period. So why is that? And I suppose people might question, what can a student strike actually achieve?
It is definitely something that we've organised around before. I mean, we were talking on the demo to students about other times that it had been used and how it had helped move students a lot, movements along, kind of thing. So I was thinking about like anti-academies campaigns, and also things like Trump. Firstly, obviously, it is a strong form of action when you work together in your school or however it is. Workers don't go to management and ask for a pay rise on their own. They go with their union, and the same is true of students. Going on your own to Parliament and complaining about climate change isn't nearly as strong as organising in your school and showing how angry you are about the situation by organising on that level and taking strike action. But it's also that as part of a movement, not just maybe against climate change, but looking at other issues as well that particularly young people and working class people are annoyed about. By linking up on that basis, you can create a really strong movement. In the anti-academies campaigns, they were strengthened by students taking strike action, and a united movement of working class people and students organising together is a really powerful movement. And by taking strike action, students can, play the most effective role that they can as part of a mass movement really against, climate change, yes, and the Tories and other issues that people are worried about.
Yeah, because we raised it last year, didn't we? And actually managed to organise some young people to walk out against Trump when he visited Britain last year. But we were very clear in being the ones who initiated it in the 2010 student movement when they raised the cap on fees to £9,000 a year. And on the first big demonstration against the Tories doing that, it was us who distributed leaflets calling on people to organise walkouts, and that then did take place in the following protests. And that actually was an important example, wasn't it? Because, like Theo pointed out earlier, that we think it's the organised working class that's got the power to change society, but young people can sometimes be a really important lever in that process, because actually following the student movement in 2010, that kind of acted, didn't it, as to make a number of workers say, well, we want to be taking action. Actually, these young people are showing the way, but we want to be doing the same thing. And in 2011, there were then big strikes over the issue of pensions. It's also something that we organised around in the Iraq War, the anti-Iraq War movement as well. Again, a kind of an idea that we initiated. And I suppose what's been a common feature of our work, isn't it, is that we've had confidence that young people, when they're given the chance to organise in that kind of way, will be bold and have that kind of enthusiasm that you've described existed on the protests on Friday. So coming out of it then, there were some arrests on the protests that have been highlighted, and also threats at a number of schools of disciplinary action against the students who took part. So what is Socialist Students saying, Theo, should happen now to defend against that?
Well, Socialist Students, after we heard about this, and actually it was before those arrests happened at the end of Friday, I believe 3 students got arrested after participating in a sit-down protest blocking one of the roads. But we actually heard about it in the conversations we had with students. Also, again, people speaking on the open mic saying that there were letters circulated, they'd been threatened with everything from sort of slightly more minor things like detentions to suspensions and exclusions from school. So Socialist Students immediately put the call out to say, you know, look, if this has happened to you, if you're being sort of targeted, if you're being threatened with any recriminations for attending these protests, you know, to get in touch with us. We want to build protests, lobbies of schools, if this is happening anywhere, because we think it's very important. It's the right to protest, you know. It's young people expressing their right to protest, trying to fight for the future of the planet and the environment. But it also returns back to this question of, you know, the trade unions, because, for example, you know, Friday was fantastic. It was as we said, it was incredibly energetic, determined, and you know, a very fighting mood. But, you know, there was no sort of, unfortunately, not really much stewarding or direction of the crowd or anything like that. I think that was quite obvious on Friday. But I think definitely, you know, the trade unions, specifically the NEU, the National Education Union, the UCU, the education unions in general, could play a role in that, you know, supporting students' right to protest, helping to potentially, alongside students and young people, organising the walkouts, you know, helping to steward the events in order to keep people safe, try and prevent arrests, and things like that, which is, you know, that's going to be a key, crucial aspect of the work that we in Socialist Students are going to be conducting between now and March 15th.
And over the next month, head teachers and managements of schools will definitely be thinking about trying to reduce the number of students who walk out of their schools. So they may even up what they've said would happen today. But the thing is, previously when we've organised walkouts, we've even nearly negotiated with management to say, look, this many students, 60 students, are walking out of this class. If you want to put them all in detention, then you'll have an even bigger problem in your hand, because we'll continue to organise on a bigger basis and say that we think that students have the right to make their voices heard, go to Parliament and protest, and therefore we'll organise together. We raised, you know, just small things like, if detentions are called, then we should call protests against those detentions to say that these students were protesting. They were, you know, making their voices heard. And that shouldn't be discouraged. But yeah, if we organise on an even better basis within schools, then we think we can also try and take on some of the threats of action against students and try and protect students who ultimately are just trying to be engaged in politics and fight to try and save the planet.
Yeah, because far from the answer to those kind of threats being to back down and reduce the action, the best protection is actually to be even more organised and be, you know, build bigger and so on, isn't it? So that kind of leads us on to my final question then, of what should the next steps be for organising this movement?
Well, I think, like Helen just said, you know, I think a big part of between now and March 15th is going to be, you know, taking our campaign as Socialist Students, the Socialist Party, taking our campaign directly to the schools and colleges, you know, from everything from the basics, you know, organising leafleting sessions, sort of call-outs in lessons, sort of like shout-outs in lessons addressing students to raise awareness of March 15th. Again, sort of from smaller basic things to organising banner-making sessions, but also to organising protests, actions, stunts between now and March 15th in order to build. In some cases, that might be, you know, to protest against detentions, against punishment for students who participated in the February 15th climate strikes, but also just protests, perhaps, you know, like sit down protests in school playgrounds, college playgrounds, things like that, protests outside the schools in the run-up to March 15th.
Yeah, I definitely think that we just need to start getting really organised on a school by school basis. If you're, you know, if you came on the demonstration, you couldn't have walked away and thought, well, I'm the only person in my class who's angry about this, because clearly I'm sure people will have run into, like, their schoolmates that they didn't even know were planning on coming. And so, you know, for people who did run into their mates just on the demonstration, didn't even realise they were both or all going to come on the demonstration, the next job is, particularly in London where we've got half term, meet up with those people. We've got an organising meeting in London this week. People should meet up and start talking about what they can do at their school, working with everyone who's angry about climate change, and start organising more action that can help us build for the next demonstration.
And there's a potential out of that to build for a youth and student movement more generally, isn't there? And I know that Socialist Students is raising the idea of potentially developing school student union structures out of this, for example.
Yeah, because we think that we think that in order to do all this, fundamentally you need to be organised, and you could potentially, through that, you could be linking up different. You could get one group of students at one school linking up with other schools and colleges in the area to coordinate actions, potentially coordinate stunts and protests. But like a school students union as well would be very, very important, or could play a very, very good role in terms of defending students' right to protest when if head teachers or management in schools try to stop students from exercising their right to protest. The school students union could be a key tool in that, in actually organising the defence of those students.
And also, I think in keeping people organised for the next round of attacks from the Tories, isn't it? When there's cuts at your school, or when there's cuts to a local youth service and that kind of thing, of having democratic structures that are already established of people who know how to fight back because they've done it on this one issue, that can continue afterwards. I think that's really important as well. Okay, thanks both for joining us today.
Cheers.
We'll be coming back to this issue in future episodes soon, including discussing the Socialist Party's approach to climate change in more detail and answering the question, is climate change a political issue? So make sure you subscribe in your podcast app to get all future episodes straight to your device. Head over to the episode notes at socialistparty.org.uk/podcast for some suggested further reading. And to get involved in the type of organising Theo and Helen described, visit socialiststudents.org.uk. Now we'll leave you with Leeds Socialist Party member Ian Dalton speaking at the climate strike there on Friday.
I'm a member of the executive of Leeds TUC. That's the body that brings together trade unions across this city. We represent workers in their workplaces, around 23,000 workers in Leeds. Many of your teachers, your lecturers and your school support workers are represented by us. And we wanted to come and speak today because we want to give you our official backing and support. We think this is hugely tremendous what you are doing, the action you're taking today. Because what you're doing is joining students around the world, in Belgium and Germany, where they've had weekly strikes, highlighting this issue, saying that we can't wait for the politicians to act. We have 12 years until we reach tipping point. It's high time, instead of dithering like by our government and others, or denying that climate change is happening like Trump and Bolsonaro, that we have action to move in a sustainable direction. Trade unions have a crucial role to play. Our goal is to defend and improve the conditions of working people in this country. And we can't do that if there's no planet left for us to live on. But at a more basic level, we represent workers in many of the sectors that need a rapid change to a more sustainable approach. It's unfortunate that some in the trade unions, instead of seizing the opportunity for such change, feel that instead they have to defend industries which currently degrade our environment in order to protect jobs and good paying conditions. We don't think that's necessary. We think it's a mistake to defend damaging climate practices to protect jobs. We think a lead has to be taken from the Lucas Aerospace Works in the 1970s. They worked for a weapons manufacturer, but they said they didn't want to produce weapons anymore. They wanted to produce stuff that would help society rather than destroy it. So they got together, they drew up a plan about making things that would benefit society, using their skills to benefit society, making hospital equipment and buses and things like that instead of weapons. Why can't that be done in relation to fossil fuels? Why can't we invest instead in renewables and train people so they can transfer to build and sustain that industry with no loss of jobs, no loss of pay? weeks so people can stay in work but have more time to spend with their family on their hobbies and pursuits instead of chained to the desk. But it's not in the interest of the big multinational companies to do this. Their calculations aren't based on the needs of the planet. Their calculations are not based on the needs of people. They're based on the needs of their profits. It means giving money to shareholders. If it means giving more money to shareholders, then they're quite content to stay with destroying our planet, to stay with attacking workers' jobs and conditions. That's why even today, energy companies still put more into research in fossil fuels rather than into renewable. If these companies won't change, then the decision should be taken out of their hands. That's why many unions, including my own, call for public ownership of those sectors of energy, of transport and so on, with democratic control over them by workers and service users, so that we can make the decisions about where we want that investment to go, about the future of our planet. These are the reasons why many trade unionists, like myself, are socialists. This system where decisions by the big companies directing our planet are in the hands of a tiny elite of 1% who put themselves before everything else. That needs to change. Socialists say, instead, let's put ordinary people making these decisions. Let's have democratically elected bodies in our workplaces, in our schools, in our colleges, in our universities that link together and decide how our state should be run in the interest of the many, not the few. And I'll finish with these things. Today, we'll send an important message to the capitalist politicians and corporations who run our society. Young people won't be quiet anymore. Everyone here should be extremely proud of the stand you have taken today. And let's follow this up on the 15th of March and beyond until we get change. But for maximum impact, you need to link your struggles with working class people and the trade unions. Because when the trade unions strike, we don't have impressive, inspiring gatherings like this. We shut down society as well. That's what Trump found when he tried to not put a budget through so that people would finance his walls. The airport workers worked out and shut down America. And Trump caved in. It's that kind of mass action that can win, and it's that kind of mass action that we need to work together and build. Solidarity! Good luck with the struggle, and let's join up together in the future to campaign for the kind of social